color theory, the contrast that moves. And yet white is supposed to be about birth and life. But maybe a birth and life of itself, and black has no vibration in and of itself, but it doesn't mean that the things that come in relation to black does not have life. And maybe you can only recognize life next to death. Just gonna put it out there. Hi, my name is Wani. I'm a philosophy student at La Sorbonne, and this video is the third video of my series on Kandinsky, which is a book that I read for my class on aesthetics. And this book is called Of the Spiritual in Art and in Paintings in particular. So in this video, I'll be talking about firstly the movement of color contrast, the second, which is the first pair of contrast, which is blue and yellow, and the third, which is the second pair of contrast, which is black and white. We'll start off with the movement, which is actually super interesting, and I'll share my little schema on this side so that it's a bit clearer. But the second and third part will be a lot more emotional, a lot more interior. So if you have no idea what I'm talking about, this is why you have to watch part 1 and part 2. But essentially, it's about the contemplation of color. So from just the physical impression, the superficial impression, we have a more profound sensation, which is an emotion of the soul, an emotion that the soul feels when it contemplates color. So let us begin with this schema situation with page 140. So the first pair of contrasts is yellow as hot, chaud, and on the other side we have blue, froid. So the horizontal movement is yellow, it goes towards the spectator, corporal, and blue, it begins from the spectator, spiritual. This is actually really interesting, and there's a lot to be said because this idea of the corporal and spiritual is this tension that I personally feel is what art is about. But essentially what to take away from this is that as we look at the second thing, which is the centric movement, so the eccentric, which goes outwards, and the concentric, which goes inwards. So we can take two things away from this. One, yellow goes towards the spectator, and it's a movement that goes outwards, eccentric. But blue is something that begins from the spectator. In saying that, now I'm just wondering, I mean, based on the book, it actually shows like arrows going to the left and to the right, and I'm wondering where the spectator is positioned. But as we'll see later on, this idea of concentric movement is that it begins from inside of the spectator and then it goes somewhere higher. It's like you go so far on the inside that you reach a kind of nothing that brings you to a higher, more profound state of being. And this is just a speculation, but maybe we could say yellow is something that we would experience in terms of the first effect of color, and blue being similar to the second effect of color, which is an interior resonance. But because I don't know this for sure because he didn't write this anywhere, I'm going to move on to talking about the movements of the second pair of contrasts, which is between white, which is clair, bright, and black, which is obscur. So the movement of resistance. So with white, we have eternal resistance and yet possibility, birth. And with black, we have total absence of resistance and without possibility, so death. And in the same way, we see that white is similar to yellow in terms of its eccentric, so the energy or the movement goes outwards. And with the black, it's similar to the blue, which is concentric, which is the movement going inwards. The difference between these two contrasts is that in terms of eccentric and concentric, the white and black is under fixed form. And I think this idea of fixity becomes clearer in the second and third part in terms of sonority. So let us move on to the second part, which is to talk about the first pair of contrasts, blue and yellow. Page 144, yellow is the color that's typically earthly or terrestrial. The yellow would not become very profound. When we cool it down with blue, it takes, in this way, as it is said, higher, a maladif tone, a sickly or pathological tone. Compare it to the states of the soul, it could be said to serve as the colored representation of insanity, but not melancholy or hypochondria, but access to rage, blind delirium, and furious insanity. Sickness claims man, inverses everything, dispersing or scattering all physical force on all sides, to use all of it without goal, without limits, until exhaustion. This also makes you think of the extravagant waste of the final forces of summer in the piercing foliage of autumn, which the soothing blue withdrawn and ascends to the sky. It creates, therefore, colors of insane power without depth. Insane power without depth. The interesting thing is, like, he's describing these colors and they don't feel wrong. And yet when you think of yellow, technically it's supposed to just be happy. I paint a little bit. Not a lot. Maybe I'll add one that I recently painted. I say recently, but this is the most recent that I've painted, and it has yellow and blue, so I'll just have it here. But yeah, it's interesting because now I no longer see yellow as happy, but insane power without depth. Thank you, Kandinsky. This capacity for deepening is found in the blue, or this capacity for this in-depth study is found in the blue, and it's already in a theoretical way in its physical movements. Essentially, the idea is this deepening is from these physical movements that we talked about before. When you have a circular movement that goes downwards, I think of a tourbillon. It's a specific movement of water that I don't know if there's a word for it in English, but essentially when water just goes down the drain. It's like a tornado, but just water going downwards. And when you think of eccentric instead of concentric, I think of it as like you drop a pebble into water and then the waves just disperse. Oh, interesting. But it doesn't go deeper into anything. The thing does, but we're talking about the movement of the water. Instead of like, you imagine again, like a tornado that goes downwards to just waves that just stay on the surface. Just ideas. But these two physical movements that he describes, firstly, which pulls away from man or distances itself from man, et vers son propre centre, and it goes into his proper center. The more profound or deeper the blue, the more that man is pulled or attracted to the infinite and awakens in him the nostalgia of pure and the ultimate supra-sensible. Supra-sensible is supra, beyond, sensible is perceptible. C'est la couleur du ciel. It is the color of the sky in the way that we represent it at the sound of the word ciel. If he wrote it in a different language, I'll put it somewhere, but I'm pretty sure he wrote it in Russian. But in French, when you say ciel, ciel, it does feel like it goes up, but this is, you know what? You know what? Let's hear how they say it in Russian.
Sky.
Okay, it's sky.
Sky. Sky.
So like English, sky. Maybe he's just saying it in terms of denomination. But in French, when you say the word ciel, it does make you feel that you're going upwards. But le bleu est la couleur typiquement céleste. Blue is typically the celestial color. Blue develops really profoundly the element of calm. So now we're going to move on to the second contrast, which is white against black or black against white. So page 150 to 154, under analysis, white, which we often take as a non-color, especially thanks to the impressionist who does not see white in nature. So this was in the footnotes, but essentially Van Gogh had a question of what was at the core of the nature of interpretation. It is the tendency of not representing nature as an exterior apparition, okay, because apparence is appearance, so apparition is appearing. So not an exterior appearing, but to make appear, especially the element of the interior impression. So which is the thing that baptized this expression. So with impressionists, it's not about reflecting or representing nature based on how it is that it's appearing to us exteriorly. It's about making its interior impression appear. So then it's kind of like, before we've always been talking about like what's on the outside and what's on the inside. And now it's like we kind of see like there's this inversion where you have the inside on the outside. And that is the goal of the impressionists, which is kind of meta and insane if you really think about it. Because if we go back to the second video in terms of how it is that colors are supposed to find this kind of efficient way of touching the soul, if you can actually already represent the interior impression of something, the interior feeling of something, and specifically nature, the correspondence should technically be closer and closer compared to if you only painted, you know, a leaf. Like, what does it mean to paint the interior expression of a leaf? So while you ponder on that, I'm going to continue with this. White appears as the symbol of the world where all colors, in terms of its material properties and substances, would have disappeared. What does this mean? This world is so above us, beyond us, that no sound comes to us. A grand silence comes over us or appears to us, represented materially like a cold wall, infinite, infranchissable, insurmountable, indestructible, indestructible. So here white seems like a very oppressive thing. Yes, we understand white as purity, but now I'm getting the image of, you know, when they often represent psychiatric wards, it's really white. And in this way, the white reminds me of a complementary of the yellow. Also because he already said it before, so I'm making like mental associations. But again, the psychiatric ward, the white, the rage, the insanity. This is what I really like about his writing, because as you will see again, or as you probably already noticed, there is a movement, obviously, because before he talks about the yellow and it only really works when he has blue in it, and then at some point with the white we'll see how black comes into the picture. But also here it's like it's very hard to think or imagine each color without another color. But also because he's evoking different emotions with like froid, l'infini, infranchisable, and indestructible. So all these really strong, like angry, rageful emotions, where it's like usually when you're in front of something that is so big, it's, yeah, on the one hand, like possibly crushing, but also something that can incite rage. Well, at least for me, it's like in front of like an infinite power, I feel challenged or brought to the challenge of my own power. But I guess each person might react differently. But this oppressiveness, this purity, this clean, you can also imagine it as something that just wipes away everything. Instead of anything that goes deeper, the surface is just clean. Does white to you provoke the idea of internal purity or no? I won't answer for you, but I have my personal answer. So moving on, c'est pourquoi le blanc agit également sur notre âme, psyché, comme un grand silence, absolu pour nous. So this is why white acts on our soul like a grand silence, absolute to us. I wrote a note here which is the existence, realization, or value which is independent to all condition, time, space, and knowledge. Something that's not relative. Because if you get rid of everything, there's nothing for it to relate. All there is white. It resonates interiorly as a non-sound, which corresponds sensibly to certain silences in music. So I guess like maybe the pause or the thing that gives us rhythm. These silences do not interrupt more than momentarily the development of a phrase without marking a completion or achievement. It is a silence which is not dead, but full of possibilities. The white sounds or rings, which is interesting because it's a non-sound that rings and sounds, like a silence which could be suddenly or abruptly understood. It is a nothingness which is young, or again, more precisely, a nothingness before the beginning, before birth. And here we start moving towards black. A nothingness without possibilities. Un néant mort. A dead nothingness, after which the sun extinguishes, an eternal silence with neither future nor hope. Voila, there you go, the interior resonance of black. So we have two nothingness, one with possibilities right before birth, and here we have dead nothingness. Have you heard of black being described as dead nothingness? This is amazing. Musically, we can represent it as a definitive silence, after which what comes next will appear like the beginning of a new world. Can we have a moment of definitive silence to appreciate this phrase, which basically says that after black is the beginning of a new world? Because all that is interrupted by this silence is achieved forever. Achever could mean achieve, finish, or complete. But it's just so beautiful because it's like forever. This is perfection. This is completed to the end. Black is something extinguished, like a burnt steak. Something extinguished, like a cadaver that feels nothing, on which everything slides. In French, the euphemism for dying is s'attendre, so self-extinguish. What is interesting here is besides the idea that there is no longer life, it seems that with the word glisse, glisser, so something that slides on top, one, it is impenetrable, and this sense of impenetrability, I feel, these are just my feelings, is that the black is so dense, it's so finished and it's so perfect. And often when we say that something is perfect, it means that none of its elements can be changed. So that means that no exterior object can come in, or else it will no longer be perfect by definition. It is like the silence of the body after death. La fin de la vie, the end of life. It is exteriorly the color that lacks most totally sonority, on which all other colors, même celle dont la résonance est la plus faible, sonne plus forte et plus précise. Even the resonance that is most weak or soft rings or sounds stronger and more precise. The thing that I find interesting here is that with black, we keep describing it as absolutely no vibration and also death. And yet, it seems to give life or give something to other colors. Whereas white takes away, effacer, kind of deletes or removes. And yet white is supposed to be about birth and life. But maybe a birth and life of itself, and black has no vibration in and of itself, but it doesn't mean that the things that come in relation to black does not have life. And maybe you can only recognize life next to death. Just gonna put it out there. Okay. The effect is not the same as on white, where all colors lose their resonance. Certain decompose even totally, and leaves behind an almost ungraspable sound. For white, you not only lose the corporality, but you also lose the vibration. I'm gonna say something completely wrong, but I'm just gonna say it anyway, maybe delete it. But my experience of like Italian art, not whatever is recent obviously, the ones between like the 14th century and up to like the 17th century or 16th, there seems to be a base of black. My tutor's gonna come for me, but like there's a sense of something's painted on dark and then white is added for variation. I'm not sure of anything. But anyway, the point is that on white, things decompose and there's life, but a life that kind of negates other life or takes away other life or totally overpowers any vibration or any kind of other kind of life compared to black. I also think of white noise, things that cancels out other sounds. Now I'm just trying to make things make sense, but this is the fun thing about trying to go into the mind of the artist where some things click, some things maybe not. And also just one thing I wanted to say is like, if you're interested in understanding which color corresponds to what musical instrument, you have to read the book. I wasn't completely convinced, but I think that if you're a musician, that is something that would be interesting for you to discover because again, it's a huge interplay between musicality and colors. And just so you know, music has such a specific treatment and respect in philosophy just for its uniqueness. And also like a lot of things about like how it's the closest thing to our soul, just because the movement of music and the movement of our soul is probably the closest. Hegel wrote something about this in Aesthetics. If I find the quote, I'll put it here, but if not, read Aesthetics. But just to finish off, it is not for nothing that white has been chosen to be the jewel of joy or spotless purity. The interesting thing here about spotless, immaculate purity, this is a note that I wrote, but it just means that you can't see any other color. Because if you have a white linen dress and it's spotless, it's only white. And it kind of has this violence to it, no? Which usually you think it's black, but I feel like white is described in such a way. And just to finish off, black as that of mourning, of profound suffering or affliction, and the symbol of death. So, I hope you found this series helpful and interesting. I thank you for your attention and I'll talk to you soon.